Today I will attempt to explain how my vision of what BYU can become is interwoven with the experiences that led me here. I'll admit I remain somewhat uneasy with the boldness of the mission statement, but as I've contemplated its meaning alongside my personal beliefs about who I am and why I am here, I'm less inclined to shrink from the awesome weight of individual and collective responsibility it implies. My parents were not activists. I never knew or cared to know who they voted for or what their political party was, what their views were. Their service was an extension of their life experiences, their faith, and their discipleship. They truly believed they had a responsibility to make a positive difference in the lives of others, and they did. I've also been asked several times what I hope to change at BYU. This question makes me uncomfortable because I deeply respect this university, its history, and the relationships and connections that people have to it long before I came to it. So I'm not here to change BYU. I'm here to help it achieve its mission.
Welcome, our fantastic students, faculty, and staff to the Martin B. Hickman Belonging and Diversity Lecture. We are so grateful to you for joining us today. We will begin with a prayer offered by Brianna Cornejo. Was it good? A sophomore at BYU. You see here? Okay, here you are. Thank you, Brianna. Well, the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences mission statement says, in part, that we educate students to recognize and value both diversity and unity with the purpose of promoting the dignity and divine nature of all of God's children. This annual lecture is named for the first dean of our college, Martin Hickman. Each year, faculty member who is outstanding in increasing this understanding of belonging in their scholarship, teaching, and citizenship is honored with the Hickman Belonging and Diversity Award, and then asked to present a lecture like today. For the 2024-2025 academic year, the award recipient is Dr. David James Gonzales. Yay! An assistant professor in the history department. You can applaud again. Dr. Gonzales' accomplishments are varied and extensive. We have invited history professor here, Dr. Ignacio Garcia, to introduce Dr. Gonzales and his lecture to us today. Dr. Garcia.
Let me say what an honor it is to introduce my colleague and my friend, Professor David James Gonzales, Assistant Professor of Latino and American History. In a short time that I've known David, or Professor Gonzales, I first met him when he was a graduate student at University of Southern California, and we met at a conference, and he asked me, can a Chicano activist scholar be able to teach at BYU? And I said, yes, definitely so. And I'm glad he decided to do so. He's also been a wonderful colleague, and I've been blessed by his friendship and his intellectual insight. He is truly an intellectual of faith who believes in the mission of BYU, the gospel of Jesus Christ, and in the worth of all God's children. Dr. Gonzales was born and raised in Southern California with parents who instilled in him a love for education, faith in our Savior, and a commitment to family and community. From 1999 to 2001, he served in the Utah Provo mission, where he taught in small towns like Salina, Helper, and Hurricane. I always said Hurricane, but it's Hurricane. This experience, as well as the gospel he taught, heightened his awareness of social inequality and sparked a passion for his teaching and scholarship. He began his collegiate studies at Southwestern Community College in Chula Vista in 2001, but he took 10 years off to work in the private sector as a co-owner of a mortgage brokerage, and later worked in for-profit higher education. He completed a BA in history at the University of California, San Diego in 2011, and a PhD in history at the University of Southern California in 2017. His scholarship and teaching center on the experiences of ordinary people responding to social inequality. He is a third-generation educator and recently discovered, so family history is good, that his father's family led one of the nation's first school desegregation cases, Maesta versus Shoney, in 1914. Because of the Mexican-American community's resistance and organization in Alamosa County, New Mexico, Dr. Gonzales' grandparents did not attend segregated schools. They both graduated from college and became teachers. His parents also devoted their careers to education, teaching the children of farm workers, immigrants, and other under-resourced communities in Oxnard and Chula Vista, California. He has published in several academic journals and anthologies, including the Journal of American Ethnic Studies, American Studies, and 50 events that shaped Latino history. His current book project, which he just received this contract recently, titled Breaking Down the Walls of Segregation, Mexican Americans and Civil Rights in Orange County, California, illuminates Mexican Americans' central role in ending de jure segregation and advancing social justice in California. In 2019, he was named the Young Scholar Fellow by the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame, and a SITPA Fellow by Duke University and Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. In 2021, he received the Career Enhancement Fellowship from the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, formerly known as the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship, and the Butler Young Scholar Award from the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies here at the university. Professor Professor Gonzales is also the producer and host of the scholarly book review podcast, New Books in Latino Studies. He has also been a cornerstone of the Latino Civil Rights Seminar, and I know some of its former students are here, having written its first curriculum and being the instructor of record for its first 3 years. He traveled with his students to Texas, Southern California, and during the COVID years to the barrios of Salt Lake City. Seeing how the students admire and come to him for all kinds of advice is impressive. He has a way of speaking to them the language of civil and human rights while integrated within a gospel perspective. Professor Gonzales is also bishop of the Franklin Second Ward, a predominantly Native American ward. As I said earlier, truly an intellectual of faith. Please join me in welcoming Professor Gonzales to the podium.
All right, thank you, Ignacio, for that beautiful introduction. More importantly, for your friendship, your mentorship, which is, coming up on 10 years. Can you imagine it? It was through that podcast that I met Ignacio, and I'll talk something about that later, but his friendship and mentorship has just been a tremendous blessing, as has been all of you. I'll kind of close with this thought or question, but I often get asked, so what is it like to be at BYU? And in my struggle to answer that question, would I want the person who typically has, it's usually a colleague outside of the university or something, that has all these ideas about what BYU is and presumptions, right? And I want them to see you. You're my community. You're what BYU is to me, and I didn't know this was at BYU. So it's been a tremendous blessing. Let me also thank the Martin B. Hickman family for generously supporting this lecture and award, as well as several other initiatives on campus. Fun fact, as I was preparing for this lecture, I learned that Dr. Hickman, he taught at USC, my alma mater, and my dad's alma mater, from 61 to 67, so fight on. I also want to thank my department, and they have been an incredible surprise and just wonderful support for me, particularly my department chairs, Eric Dursteler, who's the chair when I came in 2018, and Brian Canyon, who's our chair now. Talk about facilitators. They've never said no to me, and neither has our deans. Dean Ben Ogles, who was the dean when I came in, and Dean Laura Padilla Walker. I don't know, I often wonder, I'm like, does everybody have a relationship with a dean like this? Like, I know a lot of my other colleagues at other places, they usually don't speak of, their deans like with first names and friendly, and so I know how much of a blessing it is to have that type of support. I thank also Rachel Dial for all the help in setting up this lecture today. And to those that nominated and selected me for this award, it was incredibly humbling. When you get an award, you don't think you deserve it. So it's nice. It's nice to know that people see some of the stuff that you do. And there's a lot that I know so many of you do. And so I want you to know that I see it, and I thank you for that. Lastly, to my wife, and who's here, sitting second row there. I'll point her out just to embarrass her. And we have one of our daughters here who's attending BYU. Our eldest recently graduated. She got her diploma in the mail 2 days ago. So, and that's part of the plan. That was part of the plan of, you'll hear, retooling my life and pursuing a second career option, was hoping that maybe my family could be with me at a university campus. And so it's beautiful to have that. I'm honored to follow my distinguished colleagues and friends, Ignacio Garcia, Niwako Yamawaki, Brian Gabriel, Leslie Hadfield, and Jane Lopez in receiving the Martin B. Hickman Belonging Award. As I prepared my remarks, I've actually re-listened to their talks, their messages, which you can. It's on the department website. You can listen to all 5 of them. And so I listened to them at least twice. And that became really humbling and a bit intimidating, because I'm thinking like, well, what am I going to say? How am I going to add to their wise counsel? Their examples form a living archive that we should revisit frequently as we evaluate our progress toward becoming what President Shane Reese calls the BYU of prophecy and promise. Today, I'll do my best to add to their wise counsel by leaning on and building upon their invitations and sharing a bit about my journey and how I got here. Providing the inaugural Martin B. Hickman Diversity and Inclusion Lecture in February 2020, Dr. Ignacio Garcia challenged our college to recommit to the core values summarized in 2 Nephi 26:33. And he inviteth all men everywhere to come unto him and partake of his goodness, and he denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female, and all are alike unto God. To become a Zion University, BYU must be a place where all God's children have the same opportunities and possibilities, and are not limited by race, ethnicity, economic position, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, or other individual identities or societal divisions. We can do so, Dr. Garcia taught, by challenging our assumptions about who belongs at BYU, and by once and for all dispensing with the notion that becoming BYU requires non-white and non-U.S. citizen individuals to adopt or assimilate into Anglo-American notions of church theology and culture. Similarly, in her February 2021 presentation, Dr. Niwako Yamawaki reflected on her experience leaving her hometown, and so here, now you get to check my pronunciation, of Oita Prefecture in Japan, and moving to Salt Lake to continue her education as both an immigrant to the United States and a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Dr. Yamawaki felt immense pressure to gain acceptance by assimilating to Anglo-American culture. She felt she could do best by overcoming the language barrier, so for a time she cut ties with Japanese friends, opting to speak English only. She refused, however, to give up Japanese food because she said, quote, "It is too good." And I agree with her. I wouldn't give that up either. Dr. Yamawaki also shared that she was deeply hurt by a good friend and returned missionary from Japan who told her she was only accepted to graduate school because of her ethnicity and gender. She was a Japanese woman. Not because of her stellar academic accomplishments, which included finishing her bachelor's degree in 2.5 years with a 4.0 GPA. I took 10 years to finish my bachelor's degree and still didn't get a 4.0 GPA. Close, but not that. Experiences like this are all too familiar to women, immigrants, and people of color. During my time at BYU, dozens of students and colleagues have confided in me that they've overheard racist, xenophobic, sexist, and culturally insensitive remarks by roommates, classmates, and even occasionally by faculty. To overcome the pain and isolation she felt, Dr. Yamawaki relied on the example of Jesus Christ. I believe that as a Christian, it is crucial to feel others' pain and act compassionately towards others because that is what God wants us to practice, she shared. Dr. Yamawaki also learned to embrace her immigrant identity and subjectivity, transforming her experiences into what I'm referring to as a superpower that has driven her to build diverse and empowering spaces at BYU. My pain as an immigrant and minority made me who I am today, she said. As one of many who have directly benefited from both Dr. Garcia's and Dr. Yamawaki's efforts to foster Christ-centered belonging at BYU, I'm grateful they chose to stay and build something better for the next generation of students, faculty, and staff. Few know better than they do what it's like to be the only one. Nevertheless, they recognized and embraced the opportunity and committed themselves to building bridges of inclusion and understanding before it was fashionable to do so. Their examples, along with so many of you in this audience, remind me of Alicia Schmidt Camacho's concept of the migrant imaginary, which I employ in my research on Mexican Americans' efforts to end segregation in Orange County, California during the first half of the 20th century. To Camacho, migrant imaginaries encompass the world-making aspirations of Mexican border crossers whose mobility challenged the character of both U.S. and Mexican national life over the 20th century. The migrant moves within and across national boundaries in a subordinate position to that of the citizen. As migrants narrate a condition of alterity to or exclusion from the nation, they also enunciate a collective desire for a different ordering of space and belonging across the boundary. Their narratives imaginatively produce forms of communal life and political organization in keeping with their fragile agency as migrant people. I assume that in their work to facilitate belonging at BYU, Dr. Garcia and Yamawaki have been motivated by something akin to the migrant imaginary, as have many of us who have had to cross physical and metaphorical borders. That is, our subjectivity or lived experience as perceived outsiders or border crossers prompts us to imagine, aspire, and work to achieve a different ordering of space and belonging. One where people like us, and here I refer to anyone that has felt the pain of exclusion, wouldn't feel pressure to assimilate to gain acceptance. Exactly what informs this migrant imaginary and preserves it in our mind and heart amidst challenges and setbacks is deeply personal. Today I will attempt to explain how my vision of what BYU can become is interwoven with the experiences that led me here. So as not to bury the lead, I begin with the end in mind. BYU is both a physical place and a metaphorical or symbolic space where individuals can feel either drawn to or excluded from. Clearly, it's not always one or the other, and there are various reasons for the sense of belonging that one may or may not feel at different stages of their life. My point, however, is that placing belonging at the center of our efforts to become the BYU of prophecy and promise is essential to accomplishing the university's mission, which is to assist individuals in their quest for perfection and eternal life. Now that is a lofty goal, and I must admit that I cringe at times when hearing it or reading it. At first glance, it comes across as a bit brash and presumptive. My thoughts. But as I prepared my remarks, I felt prompted to diligently study and ponder the mission statement. And wouldn't you know it, I finally realized something. See, that PhD didn't go to waste. The key word in this statement to me is assist. BYU exists to help those that share this vision and are striving towards it. Again, I'll admit I remain somewhat uneasy with the boldness of the mission statement. But as I've contemplated its meaning alongside my personal beliefs about who I am and why I am here, I'm less inclined to shrink from the awesome weight of individual and collective responsibility it implies. As members of the BYU community, our individual and collective responsibility is stated in the second paragraph of the mission statement. All instruction, programs, and services at BYU should make their own contribution toward the balanced development of the total person. Such a broadly prepared individual would not only be capable of meeting personal challenge and change, but will also bring strength to others in the tasks of home and family life, social relationships, civic duty, and service to mankind. Today, I suggest that placing belonging at the center of our efforts to become BYU should be embraced as one of our university's strategic advantages. As explained by CES Commissioner Elder Clark Gilbert, BYU's strategic advantage is its religious identity and commitment to combine faith and reason. It perhaps goes without saying that when one refers to BYU, they're not just referring to its physical facilities and grounds. Rather, they are typically pointing to the individuals that fill and add meaning to those spaces. We, faculty, students, administrators, staff, we are BYU's strategic advantage. We are those who embody and act upon the university's dual heritage and divine mandate to learn by study and faith, or as Elder Dale G. Renland recently added, observation, reason, and faith. Hence, fostering Christ-centered belonging at this place and in this space is requisite to fulfilling the university's aims and missions. Camacho's Migrant Imaginary builds on the work of mid to late 20th century philosophers like Cornelius Castoriadis, Henri Lefebvre, and Michel Foucault, each of whom developed influential critiques of post-war economic, social, and political life and institutions in both capitalist and communist nations. As I understand them, and here I beg the philosophers in the room to excuse my very crude generalizations, their writings sought to locate human autonomy, or what we, maybe in a more religious context, might refer to as agency, in the actions of ordinary and marginalized populations. Collectively, their work influenced a generation of historians to break from the great man theory of history, birthing the fields of social, cultural, ethnic, and women's history, where the narratives, perspectives, and actions of mundane people take center stage in our efforts to understand and interpret the past. Over the past several decades, the work of social, cultural, ethnic, women and gender historians has increasingly emphasized the agency of marginalized and minoritized individuals and communities, many of whom came from the places they studied. I was blessed to be surrounded by and trained by some of these scholars, although this was an unexpected and definitely unplanned outcome for me. When I returned to community college to continue my undergraduate education in 2008, I spent the prior 7 to 8 years working for small and large corporations and even ran my own business, as Ignacio mentioned. I did so with my best friend and brother-in-law, Steven Silvestro. However, seeking to learn from and recover from the economic collapse of 2008 to 2009, which forced the closure of my business and put my young family in a financial tailspin, my plan was to return to college to pursue a career as a high school teacher. Don't we usually hear that? Teachers fall back right into it? No, that's a joke. While I understood that this would be far less lucrative than my prior career as a mortgage banker and broker, I yearned for stability. I was 29 years old, married with 2 young children, just lost my house and virtually every material possession. And so I didn't fall back because I was drawn to teaching because of my parents' example. They were, I practiced, I didn't feel that. They were bilingual educators who had devoted their careers to teaching the children of immigrants and the socioeconomically disadvantaged. As a child, I don't remember them ever explaining to me why they chose this particular career path. Except for I think my dad did mention, my dad's mother was a teacher too, so maybe that was it. But then they didn't need to. Their actions taught me that they viewed their jobs as public educators as more than a means of providing for our family, however important that was. They felt a responsibility to love and serve our Heavenly Father's children, our brothers and sisters, especially those marginalized and disadvantaged by the inequities of public policy. My parents were not activists. I never knew or cared to know who they voted for or what their political party was, what their views were, until much later in life, at least. Their service was an extension of their life experiences, their faith, and their discipleship. They truly believed they had a responsibility to make a positive difference in the lives of others, and they did. I display my parents' degrees and credentials in my office to remind myself of their legacy and my responsibility. Their lives exemplified the lyrics from one of my favorite hymns, "Because I have been given much, I too must give." Although I planned to go into secondary education, I realized while teaching early morning seminary that high schoolers were perhaps not my preferred demographic. At the same time, I began to contemplate a career as a community college instructor, thanks to the examples of Professors William Horlor and Laura Ryan, both of whom taught at Southwestern College in Chula Vista, California. Their expertise, coupled with engaging and student-centered approach to teaching, opened a realm of possibilities for me, and I began to hunger and thirst for more ways of learning about the world. I first felt this desire while serving as a full-time missionary in the Utah Provo Mission from 1999 to 2001. As it has for so many others, my mission challenged my insular and frankly self-absorbed view of the world. I had wished for a mission call to Mexico or another Latin American country. And seemingly everyone else in my ward and state got that if you were Latino, but not me. So being assigned to Provo came as a bit of a shock. However, serving in small towns throughout central and southern Utah was indeed a foreign experience for this kid from Southern California. While the greatest gift of my mission will always be the increased testimony that resulted from 2 years of diligent study and application of the gospel doctrine and principles, I equally value and cherish the lessons learned from living amongst, learning from, and truly coming to love people who were very different from me. Like my mission, returning to college as a non-traditional student was a humbling experience. My peers were much younger than I was, and I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. I often fell out of place and spent many nights wondering if I'd made the right decision. Thankfully, my community college professors helped me feel like I belonged. They appreciated the real-world perspective I brought to lessons and readings and their lectures. Further, they didn't appear to be bothered by my insensate questions about their own professional journeys and educational background. They were the first teachers who I felt genuinely believed in my intellectual abilities. Indeed, they were the first to suggest that I pursue a PhD when I shared my desire to become community college professors like them. While I appreciated their faith in me, a PhD just didn't seem likely. This feeling seemed to crystallize during the summer of 2008. I had finished community college and was working full-time for a startup in the for-profit higher education sector. The job paid well and offered opportunities to advance and even complete my bachelor's degree with the company's online program. Meanwhile, I waited to hear from the University of California, San Diego, where I hoped to transfer. I came home from work one night to notice a letter from the admissions office in the mailbox. I opened it with a sense of eagerness and uncertainty. Upon reading that I'd been accepted, which perhaps was a given as a transfer student, I know there's a guaranteed transfer agreement that they have, but I just couldn't believe, that was actually going to happen. I was overcome with emotion. My fears of validation and relief were quickly replaced by doubt and self-pity. I saw no way that I would be able to enroll and attend UCSD with my current work schedule, and our family needed my full-time income, so quitting wasn't an option. It all felt like some sort of cruel joke. I was once again at a crossroads. As I prayed and contemplated what to do, I received the impression that I should accept the offer, go ahead and enroll in classes, and that everything would work out. I wish I had the time to fully recount the many miracles that occurred over the ensuing 8 years as I finished my undergraduate education in 2011 and went on to complete my PhD in 2017. While I am not a first-generation college student, I can relate to the precarity and struggle many of them feel as they encounter obstacle after obstacle along their journey through higher education. Over the years, I've wondered why my own journey was so arduous and circuitous. I seemed doomed at several points. And yet, just when it appeared there was no way forward, a path would open, and I was able to continue my educational journey. I have realized since that many of these experiences weren't for my benefit only. They sensitized me to look for and recognize the challenges faced by others, and instilled a desire to break down arbitrary and unnecessary barriers, building bridges of possibility and opportunity in their place. At both UCSD and USC, I was privileged to be surrounded by an incredibly diverse and supportive community of students, faculty, staff, and administrators that shared a commitment to transforming higher education into a more accessible and equitable institution. I'm a beneficiary of the promise of higher education because of generous mentors and programs that convinced me there was not only space, but a place for someone like me at every university. One initiative that proved especially beneficial was the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program. The McNair Scholars, as it's known, is a federal trio program funded by the Department of Education at 151 colleges and universities across the nation. It selects high-achieving students from underrepresented backgrounds. I emphasize high achieving because sometimes with affirmative action-like programs, people think it's a free pass. At UC San Diego, the incoming average GPA of freshmen was 4.3 weighted when I got in there. So it was tough competition to get into these programs, and ACT scores were near perfect. It selects, again, high-achieving students from underrepresented backgrounds and prepares them for doctoral study. The ultimate goal of the program is to transform individuals who go on to transform communities and institutions. Not only did I have the privilege to be a McNair Scholar as an undergrad, which provided my first opportunities to engage in faculty-mentored research, but while at USC, I became a graduate assistant and later administrator of the same program and others like it. Many of my peers and later students and colleagues had a much more difficult journey than I. Reflecting on the comfortable middle-class and stable family background that I came from, which included the privilege of U.S. citizenship, something I acknowledge I never earned, that was just given to me at birth. I occasionally wondered if I belonged among them. Nevertheless, the community we built together was so supportive and empowering that my personal doubts and insecurities were displaced by feelings of belonging and responsibility. Now, I realize, of course, that these programs were, and remain, a small part of much larger elitist institutions that maintain their prestige through so-called meritocratic standards and market-driven practices that exclude far more than they include. My greatest frustration with top-tier colleges and universities is that they're afraid to be different. Instead of embracing and building upon what makes them unique, they often strive to be like the elect few. Despite their aspirational mission statements and mottos, their ideals are too often sacrificed at the altars of notoriety and exclusivity. In my opinion, that's all it is. No number of degrees awarded, dollars raised, championships won, or accolades received can cover up what equates to educational malpractice if they fail to prioritize and serve their students, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized. Now, however troubling these limitations are, I still believe in higher education, and I strive to model in my teaching and scholarship that we can't excise ourselves from every inequitable space or institution. At some point, we need to find a place where we can stay and do our part to move the needle. Participating in student outreach initiatives like McNair Scholars and the Research Gateway program, you see like a direct correlation, right? It's like almost like I was prepared to do the same thing here. It's had the most profound impact on my development as a teacher, mentor, and scholar. Through them, I became more aware of the problem of social inequality, the topic that animates my teaching and research. Moreover, the scholarly tools I acquired through graduate training complemented my faith and spiritual development. You see, I became concerned with socioeconomic inequality on my mission. I'll never forget the distinct impression I received one night while eating dinner with a member family in their rundown single-wide trailer near Salina, Utah. As I looked at the food that was so generously prepared for my companion and I, which was chili mac, white bread and butter and watered-down punch, I received the distinct impression that this was the best they could offer. My heart swelled with gratitude and love for them. I looked for the family at church the following Sunday and noticed one of their sons wearing a white shirt that appeared a bit too big for him, not a bit, like way too big. He was drowning in it. And so I thought he was wearing his father's shirt. Again, I received the impression they are doing the best they can, and it is acceptable unto me. My mission made me acutely aware that while all are equal in the sight of God, our societal institutions do not value or reward people's faithful actions and diligent work equally. I began to realize that no matter how hard some people strived, there were other factors at play that hindered their ability to become spiritually and temporally self-reliant. While this may be the way things are, it was a hard pill to swallow then, and it remains so today. Later, my collegiate studies, coupled with my mentoring of underrepresented students, provided another lens to understand the structural limitations placed on human agency. I began to make connections between the various forms of socioeconomic inequality I witnessed throughout my life. As I mentioned earlier, my parents were public educators who spent their careers teaching in underserved neighborhoods, communities, immigrant enclaves, and working-class neighborhoods, what some disparagingly refer to as hoods and ghettos. While I spent a lot of time on their campuses, I didn't attend them. We lived on the other side of town. See that the green part out towards the east, so there's Chula Vista, all that green stuff. That's where we lived. You can find the word that says East Lake. We were over there. You know where the good neighborhoods, the good schools were? I don't recall my parents ever explaining to me and my siblings why we lived where we did. But it became clear over time they wanted us to have the best opportunities they could provide, and they knew that it mattered which neighborhood and which schools we attended. They also knew that the children they taught and the families they served were striving for the same things. Though they never said so, I came to see my parents' career choice as a form of activism. They refused to turn their back on the inequality that surrounded them, and they used the tools they had, their education, training, and faith, to do something about it. My collegiate studies and subsequent research have taught me about the inherent power and inequality within the social and physical ordering of space and place. I've learned that development and underdevelopment, investment and disinvestment are inseparable, and that they impact and harm individuals and communities and families alike from Provo, Utah to Chula Vista, California, and the US-Mexico border. Intentional or not, I refuse to accept it. As I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't plan this journey through academia. I simply wanted a stable job as a teacher that would permit me to provide for my family. I didn't know you could study this stuff. I thought I was going to do early American religion, to be honest with you, or study the revolution. That's what I thought history was. I didn't know you could study social inequality through the intersecting lenses of race, ethnicity, nationality, region, culture, religion, class, labor, gender, sexual orientation, all that stuff, right? In fact, at various times throughout this journey, I wondered, how did I get here? Like, why am I learning this? Where and what will it lead me to? And how do I reconcile it with my faith? That last question has been especially challenging and remains a work in progress. It always felt natural that my growing scholarly interest, or obsession, as one church leader once put it, in societal inequality grew out of my testimony and values as a disciple of Christ. I've been told, and thereby occasionally felt, that my faith, scholarship, and teaching were at odds. I felt alone in resolving this seeming conflict until I met Dr. Ignacio Garcia. As I've shared with several audiences, I was aware of Dr. Garcia's scholarship because, like in my field, everyone is. You got to read his work. But I didn't know he was a member of the church. Discovering his book, Chicano While Mormon, was a revelation. Learning of his experiences navigating his own non-traditional path into academia and reconciling faith and activism lifted a tremendous weight off my shoulders. I realized once again, I wasn't alone. Someone else understood what I felt and, more importantly, was willing to befriend and mentor me. I wouldn't be at BYU if it wasn't for Ignacio. I've said that a lot, and it's because I mean it. There's no way I would have come here. It's not that I harbored ill feelings towards this university. It just never entered into my mind that BYU had any use for a teacher and a scholar like me. On behalf of the hundreds, if not thousands, of students, faculty, and staff that you have befriended and mentored, muchísimas gracias, hermana. Thank you for choosing to stay and building a more inclusive and welcoming space at BYU, where others like me and those in this audience could imagine, feel, and work towards the same goal. Now, some have joked that by hiring me, BYU has its next Ignacio. And that's funny, because let's be clear, there's no replacing Dr. Ignacio Garcia. I've met many others, however, within and outside our university who shoulder the weight of striving to learn by study and faith while not quite feeling like they truly belong in either their faith community or academia. In Brown Church, professor, lawyer, and ordained minister Robert Chow Romero describes this feeling of being caught in between spiritual and secular spaces as a spiritual borderlands. He explains, in many institutional, and this is a very Chicano perspective, but just use Chicano as a metaphor, right? In many institutional religious spaces, we feel out of place because of our concern for social justice issues is not understood. When we share our concerns about issues of educational inequity or comprehensive immigration reform, we are met with blank stares or even outright opposition. We are told those are political issues that are separate from faith. As a result, we often walk away from church and formal religious institutions. We may cling tenuously to a personal faith, but our activism becomes divorced from institutional Christianity. At the same time, in the world of Chicano and Chicano studies, and you can broaden that out to secular institutions, our faith is usually discouraged or criticized. We are told, you can't be a Christian and care about issues of social and racial justice, racial and gender justice. Christianity is the white man's religion, and it's a tool of settler colonialism. It's racist, classist, sexist. As a result of such hostility, many Chicanos and Chicanas keep silent about their faith for fear of persecution or ostracization. Others lose their faith. Some tenuously cling to a personal relationship with God, but abandon institutionalized Christianity altogether. In the words of Gloria Anzaldúa, Christian Chicanas and Chicanos are left out or pushed out of existing Chicano and Chicana categories. But instead of leaving one's faith community or silencing our beliefs to find acceptance in secular spaces, Romero and Latino theologians like Virgilio Elizondo, René Padilla, Elizabeth Conde Frazier, and others advocate for integrating the gospel with social action, or what they call misión integral. Spanish is my second language, by the way, right? I got a pocho tongue, as they said. That's like a whitewash, right? Spanish thing. Whitewashed Mexican, that's what they call it. As Romero explains in Brown Church, Jesus came to save, redeem, and transform every aspect of our lives and the world. This includes everything distorted or broken in our world, whether personal, familial, social, or global. Nothing is left out. It includes our personal, emotional brokenness and dysfunctional family relationships, but also poverty, racism, slavery, human trafficking, oppression of immigrants, warfare, lack of clean water, AIDS, gang violence, and lack of educational opportunity. The gospel imperative is one of misión integral. Now this reminds me, that is the concept and practice of misión integral, and my students should be familiar with this scripture. I share it a lot. Reminds me of the prophet Mormon's observation in Alma 28:13 through 14. And thus we see how great the inequality of man is because of sin and transgression, and the plans which he hath devised to ensnare the hearts of men. But then there's the other part. And thus we see the great call of diligence for men to labor in the vineyards of the Lord. Combining or coupling this scripture with Nephi's counsel to liken all scriptures unto us, that it might be for our profit and learning, motivates me to imagine and build spaces of equity, inclusion, and belonging. Dr. Romero is just one of several scholars who've accepted our invitation to speak at BYU thanks to the generous support of our college and the Department of History, the Charles Redd Center, the Kennedy Center, Latin American Studies, Global Women's Studies, American Studies, and the Harold B. Lee Library. Our guests have taught, learned from, cared for, broken bread with, and encouraged our students here at BYU in solidarity as fellow people of faith, even though they come from various religious traditions, committed to transforming the spaces they inhabit. Their messages, joined with those shared through the BYU devotionals and forums, illustrate the type of place we are striving to build at BYU. This diversity of opinion and experience, united around the common themes of faith, cultural, religious, and intellectual pluralism and equity, helps me to feel like there's room for me at BYU. And indeed, as my friend and colleague, Dr. Jane Lopez, reminded us last year at this very lecture, there's room for all of us at BYU. All right, to wrap up. So again, I've been asked this question a ton since coming to BYU. More than any other, today I've shared some of the experiences and ideas that inform my view of what BYU can be by placing Christ-centered belonging at the forefront of our efforts. I'm at BYU because I believe it is different. I embrace its unique identity and its institutionally specific aims and mission. But I'm also aware that we're not there yet. It's a work in progress. I've also been asked several times what I hope to change at BYU. This question makes me uncomfortable because I deeply respect this university, its history, and the relationships and connections that people have to it, long before I came to it. So I'm not here to change BYU. I'm here to help it achieve its mission, a mission that is focused on individual and collective transformation. In his inaugural address, President Shane Reese taught that becoming BYU will require that we have the humility to ask what we need to change and the meekness to ask what lack I yet. I've asked myself a form of this question at the beginning of each semester since coming to BYU. It's also a question I often ask as I reflect on conversations with students and colleagues. I'm not afraid of change or resistant to it. I'm just a lot more interested in transformation. And I know I'm not alone in this. I see, appreciate, and admire so many of you in this audience. I really do believe we are BYU's strategic advantage. And that's what gives me the confidence to assure our students and colleagues that there's a place for them here. In closing, I want to thank my students. Now, I know they're all of ours, but today I get to claim them as mine. You have been my greatest teacher and have had the most transformative impact on my development as a disciple, a scholar, and mentor during my time at BYU. I appreciate your willingness to learn and grow with me. Thank you for the challenging questions and comments, as well as your patience as I strive to demonstrate what my discipleship looks like. I embrace what you bring to our university and what you're striving to become. I believe each of us has been prepared to help this university fulfill its divine mission and mandate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzales, for your remarks. We are so fortunate to have you here today, and we are so fortunate to have you, our faculty. You said it's a work in progress, but I know why you are here. I am convinced why you are here. But at the same time, I'm also convinced that why all of you guys are here. You all have God-given purpose and responsibility to be here. And it is your responsibility to find out the purpose that God gave you. At the same time, I also want you to know that you deserve to be here. You all belong here. You are wonderful, very precious, valuable children of God. You all deserve to be here, and you have purpose here. I want you to find it. So we presented Dr. Gonzales with his award in our college ceremony in August. But please join me now in thanking DJ, we call him DJ, for his presentation and remarks. We will end our meeting with the benediction offered by Lucy Eckholt, who is a freshman from St. Cloud, Florida. Lucy?